There is a sort of kind of linear process in what happened and where I started to where I am now. And I suppose my connection to Sunderland and the Northeast in general is that I did come up here in 1981, a very skinny, definitely skinny. How old was I? 18, 19-year-old to study painting at Sunderland Poly. And I arrived all 9 stone of me and went into the painting department, and they asked me to do a painting, a copy of a famous painting, which I thought was a bit of a waste of time anyway. And I did mine on a door that I pulled out of a skip. And after I painted it, I carved the faces into the door. And instantly, they said, get down to sculpture. And that was the end of my painting career up until about a year ago. So there was a guy, when I went downstairs, who was teaching stone carving from life, which I've never seen before. And I felt very sorry for the life model because she was sat on a table, lie down on a table, and we had a series of tables around it, and we were firing bits of stone at the model. And there was some element of me when I picked up a mallet and a chisel and a piece of stone, and I had so much energy, I thought, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. And it turned out that nobody had carved any stone in Sunderland for a very, very long time, but they'd had a delivery of stone every year. So they had mountains of the stuff. But no one, and I mean no one, knew how to carve stone. A lot of people could build me a ship if you wanted them to, because all the technicians had been shipbuilding or whatever, and there were metal workers coming out of your ears, but nobody who'd worked in stone ever. So I had to make my own tools, and I had a hammer and a mountain of stone, and I just, for 3 years, carved whatever they had. It was all local sandstone, and this is from my degree show in 1981. This was part of a figures on a boat, and there's some drawings in the back. All I did for 3 years was carve stone, do pen and ink drawings, and smoke roll-ups. As far as I can remember, that was pretty much it. And like everybody else, I thought, I'll go and get a studio. And my parents lived in Chester at the time. So I thought, right, I'll get a studio in Chester. And I went home, and my mum said, you need to go down to the job centre. So I went to the job centre, and there was a job for a stonemason. It was an old company called Clegg's in Chester. So I went to see them, and he said, right, where did you serve your time? I said, I haven't served any time. It sounded like prison. I said, I've been to Sunderland and I've carved stone for 3 years. And he said, oh, no. We want a time-served stonemason, which the apprenticeship for a stonemason is 7 years. And I obviously just carved figurative bits and bobs in Sunderland for 3. And he said, absolutely no chance. So I offered him a deal. I said, look, if I work for you for a couple of weeks for free, and if you think I'm any good, then I'll keep me on. So he did. And I worked there as a mason for 3 years, which was both difficult, rewarding, fascinating, and hard, really, straight from college. It was outside. There was a foreman called Morris, permanent cigar in his mouth, who would lean over me and tell me what I was doing wrong. It took me ages to do really simple things. To be honest, I didn't know what I was making whenever I was there, because they just gave you a template made out of zinc, and you put it against the stone, drew around it, put it on the other side, drew around it, and then carved it off. And I'd make sort of corbels, little rounded stones and things. And I slowly progressed over 3 years. There were some brilliant carvers who'd been doing it all their lives. So yeah, I worked there for 3 years, and I cycled in with my sandwiches. I'd gone back to live at home, and it was a great place to learn, as they would say, how to carve stone properly. Anyway, during that time, there was an event called the International Youth Year in 1985. So this is maybe a year after I graduated. I contacted the local newspaper and said, I will make a sculpture for the International Youth Year in Chester. Do you think you can find me somewhere to do it? So they contacted the cathedral, and said I could do it in the cathedral grounds. And then I contacted I had a word with my boss at the masonry company, and I said, look, I'm doing this thing. Could you donate a piece of stone? And he donated a piece of Birkenhead docks that they'd dragged out. They did a lot of sort of old stone, refurb stone. And this was it. And this was a fanfare for the International Youth Year, the first piece of public art I ever did. And it was public because I did it in front of everybody from start to finish. Took me about 4 months. I did it at weekends and after work. And eventually it was tipped over by the drunks and smashed after about 2 years. So it was a great learning process. Again, all the ones where everything's gone wrong or something's got damaged. That's where you learn most from, I suppose. But I enjoyed doing it. And I got lots of nice feedback and people write poems about it when I was doing it. But it was very public. It was very, and there was no health and safety. There was no, I just remember I had no barriers around me during this period. So if anybody got too close, they were going to get a big chunk of stone in their eye, but nobody did. And so, yeah, that was the first one I ever did. And then I got a commission. What did I do? Oh, yeah, I'd got this idea that I should go and get a master's degree. So I got in at Sunderland Polytechnic to do a master's degree. And whilst I was there doing that, I just thought, why am I doing this? The only reason I could honestly think of for doing a master's is if I wanted to be a teacher. And I knew I didn't. I wanted to make things. And all the lecturers at Sunderland, who I admired, seemed to me to spend their whole lives bemoaning the fact that they weren't doing their own work. Anyway, so halfway through the master's, it was a 2-year part-time, I got this commission, which was advertised in The Guardian. That was where they used to advertise. And it was for a music club in Sheffield. They wanted something to, well, celebrate the club. It's called the Lead Mill, and it's about 12 feet high. And halfway through, I had a car crash where someone was driving along the wrong side of the road and hit me head on. I was in hospital for 3.5 months with a broken femur, and then it took me about another 6 months to recover. So this sculpture took about 2 years. It went to 3 different venues, and eventually it went up. And recently, there's been a load of hoo-ha about it because somebody's bought the building and tried to take the sculpture with them. And they've taken half of it, and then the council have stopped them. So the top half is now missing, and the bottom half is still there. And I don't know what's going to happen at the moment. But there was a massive amount of fury about it because, like all public art, nobody really spots it when it first goes in. But as soon as you try and take it away, then suddenly it's a big deal. But it has been in there for 38 years or something, become part of the fabric of the building. So yeah, that was the second piece I did. And then I got a commission around here. This is near Hartlepool somewhere. I can't remember where, to be honest, but there's a sheaf throwing competition that's been going for 500 years, which absolutely looks nothing like this at all. It's, in fact, you get some hay on the end of a pitchfork wrapped in a bin liner, and you throw it as high as you can over a post. And this had been going on for, as I say, the village celebrated this and had done for somewhere around 300 years. They'd had a sheaf throwing party every year. So I was commissioned to make a sculpture. It's still there because I've seen it on the Instaweb, but I can't remember where. That is Cadeby limestone. So that was one of the things I made during the time where I'm making windowsills and bits of churches and all sorts of things for various people. It was one of the first things I did in Ireland. There were jobs advertised in Ireland that nobody applied for. For some reason, people thought it was further away than it actually was. And so many people that I've talked to over the years still have never been to Ireland. You know, they've been all across the world, but never been to Ireland. Anyway, the Irish, God bless them, have, and yeah, they had, and they still have, a percent for art. So a percentage of every building, anything that's built, is spent on art. What a great idea. This was part of a new school near Dublin, still there. Cats and dogs do yoga in Clondalkin. So I'd worked at Cadeby Quarry, which was about, 20 miles from where I lived. And I'd started bringing in different stones. I wasn't even using the stone from the quarry. And stupidly, I carried this on for years, just driving. commuting to a different quarry and bringing stone in. And one day, probably my wife, who's got much more common sense than I have, said, why don't you actually go and have a look at some of the local quarries up here? And there was one 2 miles away. And I went up and asked them if they needed any letter cutting doing, because I'd learnt that when I was a stonemason. And they said, yes, of course we do. It was around about the time when everybody was having signs done for the millennium. And they said, yeah, come on up, come and do some letter cutting. And I did. And I stayed for 30 years without paying any rent, which was fantastic. That was the joy of working in a quarry. It didn't cost me anything. And we had a sort of symbiotic relationship. And this is Marshalls, which are a huge company. And they opened a big window to me of stone from around the world. And this was classic Marshalls. They came to me in November one year and said, Mike, can you carve me a snake? I said, yeah. And so I carved them a snake. It was about this big. And I took it in, hoyed it in, put it on their boardroom table. And they said, that's nice. Now we need a bigger one. And they had, little did I know, sponsored the Chelsea Flower Show for 3 years. And they wanted a big snake. So the Chelsea Flower Show opens in May. And this was just before Christmas. And they said, yeah, we need a big snake for Chelsea. And we'd got 3 months. This is in Nottingham, Rufford Park in Nottingham, part of their permanent collection. The place is now, it used to be owned by the council. It used to be a big ceramics place, if you've been, and it's now unfortunately closed down. And that on my right, is my daughter, who's now 29. So that's how old that one is. Appleman, hefty. Yeah, so the quarry environment, why work in a quarry? Simple as that. It's big, you can work big. You've got no issues with waste. Obviously, you've got a lot of health and safety, hence all the bright colours and the steel boots and all of that. But there were lots of big machines to move things around. And I'd been out of college at this point by 15 years, maybe 20 even. Still got a studio, but I was making stuff on a big scale and employing people. This is in a brain injury unit in Belfast. There's an element of humour in a lot of the things that I do. Again, man with an apple, keep cropping up. And these were set in the brain injury unit. They're about this high, and the idea was that people could go around and touch them. What I like about public art is you can touch it. It's not a fussy operation. Once it's there, it's got a life of its own. It's generally, obviously that probably wasn't because that was in a garden in a hospital, but it's christened by a dog as soon as it arrives in the space. It's not my work, it's there. It's, somebody once said to me, you can't see it from your house, Mike, and I can't. And it's important that whatever I put into the public sphere is liked and enjoyed by the people that have commissioned me in the first place. And so, as I said, some are more successful than others. I'm presuming, I've never been back, that this is still happily in the garden in Belfast. When I was at Marshalls in the quarry, I realised that there was a guy there who worked with International Stone. He was the director of International Stone. And I started travelling a little bit at the behest of Marshalls and looking at various stones from around the world. And this is an Indian sandstone, very dense, doesn't age. This one's called Feeding Time, Sailing to the Isle of Dogs. There you go. And these I did in Jaipur. So I went over. I've travelled a lot and looked at a lot of different stones and worked with a lot of different people over the years. I went to Zimbabwe to work with the Shona carvers after an exhibition in 1993, I think it was. There was a fantastic exhibition of Zimbabwean carving, and I went over and lived with them and looked at their stones and learned how to do what they did, which was polish certain areas and leave certain areas tooled. And Jaipur, when I was doing these, I had 5 assistants. It was very lovely. And I made a lot of sculpture over there. And the food was great. And the sun shone. And it was January or February, I can't remember. And it was lovely. Right. So I got this commission in Leeds to make some seats. And the commission, the brief was, if a truck hits them the truck comes off worse. That was it. That was the only thing they said. So I thought, right, they've got to be granite. So I went to the director of stone at Marshall's and I said, I've got this commission. I want to make these feet walking down the street that people could sit on. And there were 3 of them in different granites. And he said, great, we're going to China in a fortnight. We'll sort you a visa out. Come with us. And I went and I took my templates. And I was, a bit like in India, I was amazed. The skill set of the people working this material was phenomenal. And they were making giant Buddhas and huge heads, nothing at all that would work very well in the UK, but the skill set was incredible. So I started working with the Chinese. What I loved about granite from the outset was that once you'd put it into an environment, it stayed looking exactly the same. Now, these have been in centre of Leeds now for over 15 years, and I could take a picture of it, and I don't know when I took that, but it was probably about 8 years after I'd put it in. It hasn't changed at all because it doesn't absorb any water. As I said, limestone is porous, it's about 30% porous, sandstone's about 20% porous. This is 0.01% porous. Nothing gets in. So yeah, started working granite. This is in South Shields. Ice cream bollards on Ocean Road in South Shields. Instead of a mining monument about the death of the industry and how awful it was, both of my grandparents were miners, and I wanted to celebrate the joy of the community of miners rather than the end of an industry. And in my little survey, and I did it around the miners of Normanton, where at one point there were 10,000 miners and now there are none. What they missed, and none of them missed the work, but what they did miss was the sense of community and the laugh and all of that went with it and the crack that they had. So I came up with a piece of sculpture called Snap Time, which is what they call their lunch. And they're just sharing a joke back to back, having their snap. And this is outside Greg's in Normanton, and there's 2, they used to take their lunch in snap tins, which was shaped like a loaf of bread, the end of a loaf of bread. And there are 2 snap tin benches next to it. So people can go to Greg's, sit on the benches and enjoy their lunch with the miners. And I would consider that one a successful piece of public art from my perspective. This was, I have done one post-Brexit piece in Ireland, and this was, obviously you can see the birds that have appeared in this for the first time that are in the paintings upstairs. And this was, again, I was very unpopular for putting this in. This was partly to celebrate peace in Ireland. This is in a place called Drogheda, or Drogheda, I can't even pronounce it properly. It's about 30 miles north of Dublin. And this is a square, St. Joseph's Square. And that is St. Joseph's Church, which is Catholic. And there's another St. Joseph Church, which is Protestant. And you can see both of the spires from the square. And I made this piece called Inspired to Meet Up. And all it really is saying is it's better to talk than fight. Simple as that. Better to talk than argue. But I'm British and they're Irish. Who am I to go over and tell them what, that was the state of the play in the local press anyway. Except one person who said, look, it doesn't matter who does these things. It's the sentiment that matters. So all of it, as I say, all of it, and the Irish stuff to do with peace, I can understand why would anybody want an Englishman to go over and work in Ireland. I get all that, and yet I've been over there a lot. But I considered this one to be quite a successful one because they did get the idea, and it is simple, and there is an element of humour about it. And the 2 spires from the 2 churches are in it, and 2 birds having a laugh. What you can see upstairs has very little to do with public art in many ways. It's free from any kind of brief. It gives you a load of material and you look at it and you think, right, what am I going to do with it? And one of the things I did, why I did these trees, is I did realise that people don't have a place for sculpture in their house. People don't have a plinth, but they do have a windowsill. So these are carved on both sides. So I like the idea that you could put this in your window and people could view it from either side. Everybody's got a wall, not everybody's got a plinth. And the stones that they gave me are from all over the world. A lot of the things upstairs are maquettes for sculptural jobs that I didn't get. And this is one. This was for a school, and it's called Crest of a Wave. It was a school by the sea, in a sixth form college by the sea in Ireland. And I thought it'd be a really nice idea because the kids were, at that point, they were on the crest of a wave before they moved on into their lives at sixth form college. Anyway, I've taught and run schools of rock, as I call them. And I've taught thousands of people to carve stone. I love doing it. I've always loved doing it. And it's the only bit of teaching that I do. But I really enjoy the sort of hands-on process of people either carving a little tile like that or making a bench, which quite often they do as well. So the studio. So I'm in the studio, don't know what to do. I'm not going to carve stone because I'm inside. And I started drawing and painting. And I realized not only is it a lot warmer, I can use colors for the first time. And what you see upstairs is basically what's happened in the studio over the past couple of years. I don't know where it's going to go, to be honest. I don't know what it's going to lead to, but I do know I've opened another door. And I think life is just a series of doors opening, and you either walk through them or you don't. And I really enjoyed sitting around and painting for the past year. It's a lovely place, and there are artists there. And we are a community, and we sit around in that area, around a stove, eating our lunch. And for the first time, I've got a group of artistic friends. And the one thing I'll say about artists is they are the least arty people you'll ever meet. And I would say that about every artist that I've ever met. They're not arty. Whereas a lot of the people that come to the studio that do a lot of the courses are incredibly arty. But all the people that I know that have got studios there are just practical, I would say. And this idea about talent, which is obviously sprayed at us quite a lot. People come and say, oh, this is where the magic happens, and aren't you a talented lot? And I don't think there's any talent at all. I think that anybody can do it. I've got a huge belief in the fact that anybody, if you turn up at the piano every day, you'll carry a tune. You've just got to want to do it. That's all it is. And I've just spent my life turning up either in front of a block of stone or a blank canvas or a blank piece of paper. And hopefully I'll continue to do it. I'm going to stop there because we've run out of time.